Hello, everybody. Let me get this up and started. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about feedback systems. So, what feedback systems are they are biological systems that use energy to grow, reproduce, maintain dynamic homeostasis. So, feedback mechanisms help us maintain homeostasis. If you remember, that means balance. Please make sure you have this in front of you as we're going through this PowerPoint. This is what you're going to be filling in as I go through. We have two different types of feedback we're going to talk about. It's going to be negative feedback and positive feedback. So, what we're looking to get throughout this lecture is going to be a definition of each, an example of each. I'll go over a couple examples so you get to decide what example you want to use. Then, once you get the definition and an example, you're going to be drawing a picture of that example and giving me a description of how it is negative or positive feedback. All right. So organisms use feedback mechanisms to maintain their internal environments and respond to external environmental changes. So if you remember, this was one of our characteristics of life was being able to maintain homeostasis. Now we're going to learn a couple ways on exactly how that happens using feedback systems. So, just as a reminder, dynamic homeostasis. This is what our body needs to maintain in order to survive. So, all living things need to maintain some sort of stable internal conditions inside of the body. Examples like temperature, you can't get too cold or too hot. pH, we've just talked about this. So you can't let any part of your body become too acidic or too basic. The solute concentrations, how much salt you have, calcium, sugar, your heart rate, blood pressure, so on and so forth. We have to maintain balance with all of these things. So, what those feedback mechanisms are going to help us do is respond to the environment to help maintain balance. So, it's not constructive feedback. This is going to be negative or positive feedback to help your body maintain balance. So, the first one we're going to talk about is negative feedback. So, this is the definition it returns a changing condition back to its target set point. So, if you want to pause the video right now, you can write this down under the definition. This also gives us an example, returning the body to normal conditions. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of examples. So you can use any of the examples I give you to help draw your picture and write a description. So let's move on to looking at the examples. So, an example of negative feedback is sweating. You know, if you get way too hot, we need to cool our body down. A way to do that is by sweating. So, you guys are probably too young for David Beckham, but David Beckham, really famous soccer player. You probably do know him. But when he sweats, it's because he's really, really hot, literally, with temperature. So he's going to sweat. The sweat evaporates, bringing his heat back down. So negative feedback. Again, the definition is if something changes, we need to bring it back to its target set point. So if we have a basic temperature and it goes up too high, we're going to do something to help bring it back to normal. Another example is if you get too cold. So, if Beckham is outside or anybody and you're losing too much heat, so your body temperature drops too much, you're going to shiver and shake and get the chills and start shivering in order to help you bring your body temperature back up. So, this is another example of negative feedback. Another body example is glucose. So, glucose is sugar. If you have high blood sugar levels, so when you eat a lot of food, you start to spike your blood sugar levels. This can cause long term cell and organ damage. Low blood sugar levels, though, so if you don't eat for a really long time, you probably start to feel fatigued, you can't pay attention. It's really hard to kind of understand what's going on around you. It's because of low blood sugar. So these are two other examples. Again, you can pick out of any of these which ones you'd like to draw and use as a description. This one, pancreatic regulation. This is another example of negative feedback. So, insulin is a hormone that causes cells to take in glucose. So, if our blood levels go up a lot, so let's say you just ate a really big meal, your pancreas is going to release insulin. This is going to help bring your blood glucose levels back to their normal state. So, remember, negative feedback, if something goes out of whack, we want to bring it back to the normal state. This is triggered by high blood glucose levels. Glucagon, on the other hand, this helps raise blood sugar levels. So if you can't eat all day, let's say you're really busy, you forgot about lunch, you skipped lunch, your body needs a way of getting your blood sugar back up so that you can function. Glucagon is what's going to be released to help bring your glucose level back to normal. So this is just an example of what that looks like. So on the right-hand side where we see this turquoise arrow, if we have really high blood sugar, that's going to tell our pancreas to release insulin. If insulin is released, it's going to help uptake some of the glucose so it's not in the blood, and we achieve normal blood glucose levels again. The same happens for low blood glucose levels. If we're not able to eat, it's going to tell our pancreas, hey, we need more glucose, we didn't eat enough. Glucagon is going to be released, which then tells the liver to help release more glucose into the blood. And again, this is all to bring our body back to its normal state. So sometimes feedback systems can go wrong. I'm sure some of you have heard of diabetes. So this is issues with insulin and blood glucose levels. Another great example with the body trying to maintain negative feedback with homeostasis is when you have too much water. So if you have way too much water, obviously you're going to pee it out. When you need to save water, you actually release something called an antidiuretic hormone is going to be released, which helps you maintain water. It's going to help you not to pee and not sweat, and it's going to help inhibit water loss. So again, negative feedback, all of these examples I've gone over, they're the body going out of whack in some way or another, whether it's too much of something or too little, and coming back to its original state. Right. So this is just a picture of what the sort of water levels look like. So we need a specific water level in our blood and in our body. So if those levels drop too low, the brain is basically going to tell us, hey, we need to release antidiuretic hormone because we need to hold on to water. We do not have enough water. On the opposite, if water level rises too high out of normal range, it's going to tell the brain that, hey, we need to release this hormone so that we can pee out what we don't need. Right, now we're going to talk about positive feedback. So, one other thing with negative feedback. Remember, I already went over the definition. So, if you didn't get that, you need to go back there and pause it so you can write it down. You also were given an example. Let's go back up. Again, here is your definition: return the changing condition back to its target set point. And then an example is return body to normal conditions. For the bottom box where you have to draw and describe, you can use any of these examples that I just went over. So you are free to go back to that area and you can pause this video and draw and describe what you would like. Now we're going to talk about positive feedback. So there are instances in our body where we actually have to amplify a stimulus. So if something happens in our body, there are some instances where we want to continue that stimulus. So for an example, like if you're to eat an appetizer and it makes you more hungry and you eat more food. So amplifying a stimulus is where something continually happens because of an initial stimulus. Same thing with traffic. So if one car stops, all the other cars behind it are going to start to slow down and stop. That's positive feedback. Okay, so the best example that I have for this is giving birth. I love this picture behind all of this. So Mrs. Peanut had little baby Peanut, but how this is positive feedback is when a woman is pregnant, she's going to have contractions start when she's ready to give birth. Once those contractions start, the reason this is not negative feedback is the body doesn't do something to stop the contractions because it wants to have those. It wants to have the baby come out. So it's actually going to release something called oxytocin, which leads to more contractions. So we're amplifying that initial signal. So this is what it looks like. So basically, the head of the baby, when it's ready to be born, is going to push against what's called the cervix. Once that happens, that initial stimulus is then going to trigger the brain to release what's called oxytocin, which then causes more contractions to happen. And this happens over and over and over again until the baby is fully born and pushed out. So this is positive feedback. We're not trying to go back to our normal state. We're actually amplifying a signal and causing it to happen more. Another really cool one is fruit. A lot of people don't know this, but the way that fruits ripen is actually due to a hormone that we call ethylene. So, ethylene accelerates the ripening of unripe fruit that's around it. So, let's say one apple ripens. As that apple's ripening, if it's next to a bunch of unripe apples, it's going to release what's called ethylene. And that is going to start ripening the other apples around it. So the more the apples ripen, the more ethylene is released, and the more all of these apples are going to start ripening. So again, ethylene is something that is triggering a response to keep on going. It's going to keep going. It's not trying to go back to normal. So ethylene accelerates the ripening of unripe fruit. So nearby fruits also ripen, releasing more ethylene. Okay. If anybody is kind of a potential bank person or hasn't opened a bank account or knows anything about it, positive feedback. An example could be there is something called interest, where basically you earn money on any money you put into an account. So let's say I put $100 into an account. I'm going to earn more money on that $100, which means my account balance is going to grow, which means I'll earn more interest. And it's just this continual positive feedback. The initial stimulus grows over time. Negative feedback, again, is going to be bringing something back to its regular state. So we're not amplifying it. So if your body temperature rises, you're going to sweat. That way your body temperature drops back to normal. Okay, so once we are done with this, so really quickly, I'm going to kind of readdress positive feedback. So on this slide, if you didn't already, you need to pause this slide and copy down response to the stimulus is amplified as your definition. An example, you eat an appetizer that makes you more hungry, so you eat more food. That would be your example. Your two options for drawing what positive feedback looks like with a description is either talking about birth, or you can talk about ethylene and the ripening of fruit around it. All right. So once you get that paper done, what you're going to do is click on this link and you're going to complete the feedback systems ed puzzle. So this will be a video that goes over kind of what I just did, but it'll help explain it in a little bit more detail. Make sure you answer all of the questions. You will be graded on it, and good luck.